Take it away. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Claus Abildgren, as Knut mentioned, with the company ASON. Try to do it brief because what I'm going to touch on is a collaboration with Xavier's team at UAB in Barcelona, so he's going to put more color to some of the details. Knut, thanks for having me. Admittedly, I feel a bit like an imposter in front of this audience. I'm not a bioscientist. I certainly don't have your street creds, Steve, in terms of AI and technology, but hopefully contribute a perspective on kind of how we try to kind of tame the complexity of making drug products using biologics, using AI. Next slide, please. So I've been 25 years in manufacturing technology, mostly focused on life sciences, but also other industries. And a couple years back, I did something different, and then I started realizing, hey, there's something changing in pharma. When you see publications from regulatory authorities around AI into manufacturing, it's like, whoa, what's going on? Without going too deep, there's a lot of attention being put to, not just because of ChatGPT or the recent advancements. I like, Steve, your point around open source and the power that brings. But I think it's symptomatic when even the regulatory authorities kind of puts a lot of thought process into how can we take advantage of this technology that works in other domains, and how to think about making drug products safely and with high efficacy, etc. Next slide, please. So since I'm an imposter in today's conversation, this is what helps me understand what AI brings to the table. Using classical statistical methods, again, all of these different patterns of data points have similar, at least, kind of standard statistics. But for me as a visual learner, a visual person, it represents something very different patterns. So I think when you start thinking about manufacturing, advanced analytics in manufacturing, the CPPs and how does it drive CQAs, all these things, in my mind, this is where AI can do a lot of kind of heavy lifting for us and help us uncover a much deeper understanding of what is driving variation in these manufacturing processes. Next slide, please. So in my kind of simple mind, when we submit for new kind of approval of a drug product in various stages of the progression, we're defining a control strategy. How we're going to demonstrate that the product quality is within expected ranges, that we didn't suffer kind of excursions or out-of-spec situations, etc. But in doing so, because of the complexity involved, a control strategy many times is an oversimplification of the nature of these processes. And kind of the risk is that we're not kind of in sufficient depth representing what could be important to understand and then kind of optimize around. So the work we do at commercial and clinical scale for production is ultimately trying to cast a wider pattern of what we are able to consider in expressing and understanding variation in manufacturing processes. I'll give an example in a second, but typically it's kind of the what goes beyond kind of both, not just within a unit operation, but prior to and after, etc. But simple things like the external weather patterns can directly help understand some of the causal factors of variation. So have this in mind when we touch on an example in a second here. Oftentimes in kind of at least manufacturing domains, this is referred to as the digital twin, kind of that model representation of the physical world in a computer system. And this is more kind of semantics, that kind of it starts with the digital model, not connected to the physical process. If we start capturing data directly from our bioreactors or other instruments, you can label it a shadow. Hey, we are following real time what's going on, but ultimately kind of I wouldn't say nirvana end state, but hey, how do we then be able to action what the advanced analytics, what these predictive models can help us understand so we can optimize and then kind of improve our processes. So this is what we think of as the digital twin when they're fully connected in both directions. I'm going to do this very quickly. Oftentimes we use this analogy of the self-driving cars. I live up in San Francisco and there's still like, see the Waymo cars driving around with any drivers. It's like, oh shit, like what's going on there? It's coming at us very quick in other domains, obviously ChatGPT. And I think this example of Roomba, here it vacuums, it's the best dollars I ever spent, I think, in trying to keep the house clean. But having that data patterns, right, you can do a lot of other things with that information. So content is king, Steve, as you mentioned. And I think the same applies as we produce or manufacture drug products. So the opportunity exists to develop a much more comprehensive understanding of ultimately how am I in a green path for my next batch, or is there room to improve? So this was an example. Xavi, I'll leave you to put color to the details. As part of a PDA working group in close collaboration with the University Autónoma de Barcelona and ASON as a technology provider, we ran a kind of a real-life process example where we were trying to kind of get to that end state of the fully connected, where the AI predictive models is optimizing the fermentation process in the bioreactor in real time without human intervention. Next slide, please. Very quick screenshot. This is the bioreactor. This is the software that is connected in real time. The instruction set that is put back to the process without human intervention. And ultimately, kind of the RPM is the control variable, and we're monitoring the oxygen rate. Again, Xavi, help me with details when you come up afterwards. Next slide, please. So across this, we demonstrated kind of in kind of a real lab scale process that it is entirely possible for the AI model in real time to be connected to the sensors of the instrumentations and the processes, yield or kind of predictive models of how to do the stirrer speed kind of step up at appropriate steps in the process across the phases, and ultimately arrive at a higher respiratory quotient of the fermentation process. So again, we are leaning on technology to help us optimize that fermentation process, get more out of the available capacity. So that was the example. Xavier, I'll let you put more color to the details. This is a different example at commercial scale production. I think technically it's a chill-based kind of process, but not the same. But able to very clearly detect kind of a relationship between humidity in the media prep room and a direct impact on the fermentation process. And this is kind of the summary, as more behind it, but ultimately kind of if it's just the turbidity that suffers following a peak a couple of, I think half a day before, typically leads to raw material clumps. If it's both peak humidity, then caused turbidity and CO2 concentration changes in the process, typically involved in fungi. So with that understanding and that relationship, we can turn that into the predictive model. Hey, if we are detecting peak humidity changes in the media prep, be careful. We need to adjust the process or take proactive steps. Next slide, please. This is a different example of using kind of clustering techniques or AI algorithms in blood plasma processing or fractionation processes. So again, by law, every liter of blood that is donated needs to be processed. We can't throw out the bad stuff. So it makes a big difference if you have kind of good or bad starting point in those pools of plasma. How you set up the processes, how you set up your filtering, the column stacks, everything else. So we use or help our customers, or how customers use AI to predict yield both at every single step in the process as well as the final yield. It just makes a huge difference to have that knowledge. I think in aggregate, 55% of variance in final yield is explained by the raw material of the blood they start with. So that's how they step-by-step optimize these manufacturing processes. I think I made an update that didn't make it into the slide. Anyways, point here is it's all about giving prescriptive guidance to the people in the front lines, in the suites, in front of the equipment. Say, hey, how do I take proactive action if I'm detecting I'm in a kind of an operating state that's non-desirable or has a risk involved? And in this case, it's kind of what's the optimal window? I think this is fill finish, but this also could be a harvest operation. What is the optimal window to start the downstream process? In summary, for us, it's about taking advantage and operationalizing this kind of newfound access to computing power and powerful new technologies and tools and being kind of pragmatic. What problems can now be better understood and thereby optimized and enhanced with technology? How do we operationalize that at both clinical and commercial scale? All right, thank you.